Hello and welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List, a podcast about productivity. I'm your host, Eric Fisher, and I'm excited to welcome back Ian Morgan Cron to the show to discuss his new book, The Fix, how the 12 steps offer a surprising path of transformation for the well-adjusted, the down and out, and everyone in between. Ian's a best-selling author, a psychotherapist, an Enneagram expert, and the host of the Typology podcast. In this conversation, we're talking about how the 12 steps, originally created for addiction recovery, offer a profound transformation for anyone, regardless of whether you identify as an addict or not. But I think we're going to be able to show you that you are addicted to something. Ian's been on the show twice before to talk about the Enneagram, and if you're interested in those conversations, I've linked them up in the show notes. But let's jump on into this conversation about The Fix. Well, this week, it is my privilege to welcome back to the show Ian Morgan Cron. Ian, welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
I'm thrilled because you've done a lot of good work, and I've benefited from it, and I know a lot of other people as well. You've done a number of different books on the Enneagram, and some people, that's their thing. Others are like, I don't quite get into it. That's fine. For me, I know I enjoy it. I'm a 5. We've talked about that, dug deep into it. And a 5 has a unique perspective, I think, in some ways. I think they all do, but I'll just say I felt my 5 looking at this book in a unique way, to me at least. But you've got a brand new book. It's called The Fix, how the 12 steps offer a surprising path of transformation for the well-adjusted, the down and out, and everyone in between. And man, that's a mouthful, and that's a lot of different people. So
yeah.
I'm so curious. I mean, I kind of see the thread through because the Enneagram's all about self-discovery, self-awareness, becoming your healthier, the healthier version of your type. And this is all about that as well, but in a different way in your life as well. You've got a lot of personal, I don't want to say baggage, but discovery and journey wrapped up in this book. How did you decide, okay, it's time to write this?
Yeah. Well, listen, my mission in life is to introduce people to ideas and experiences that deepen and improve their lives. Right? This is my 5th book. All of my books are about introducing people to systems or ideas that I hope will help them on their journey toward becoming the highest expression of who they can be, right? And I have been part of this 12-step recovery world for many years, and I wanted to introduce people to the 12 steps because it's really amazing to me that the 12 steps have been around for 90 years, right? And they've helped tens of millions of people, revolutionized and transformed their lives. And everyone thinks, oh, it's for those people. But in reality, the 12 steps is for everybody. One of the cases I make in the book is, guess what? Everybody's on the addiction continuum somewhere. Everybody. So it's not a us versus them. Addictions is an us problem, not a them problem. And so I just wanted to democratize the steps and allow people who don't identify as addicts or alcoholics to realize the same benefits that those people do for themselves. I'm so stoked for people to get their hands on it.
And so a lot of people, again, they're going to hear this and think, oh, the 12 steps. Well, I'm not an addict, but you say everyone is an addict. So what is your definition of an addict so they can kind of understand where you're coming from?
Yeah, great question. I think an addiction is an unhealthy, compulsive attachment to a person, a behavior, or a substance that has mood-altering effects and negative consequences. Now, we tend to think of that as being, alcoholics and drug addicts. Okay, well, how about technology? How about social media? How about the internet? How about food? How about workaholism, sex, relationships, gambling, people-pleasing, shopping, spending, exercising, dieting, worrying, media addicts, gaming, porn, the list can go on. Nicotine, success, approval seeking. Everybody is somewhere in the game of addiction, right? And it's becoming a disproportionately larger and larger problem. Brene Brown has a great quote I use in the book. She says, "We are the most addicted cohort in human history." So we need to pay attention to this.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, you listed off stuff in there, and I won't tell you which one's kind of rung more true for me or not, but I think anybody listening can say, okay, yes, something in that cloud of amorphous, vices, so to speak, will, it'll semi slightly or even, maybe outwardly trigger them to a cringe or something. So, and the thing is that I think that's one of the things that makes people feel like they can hold that at bay. They can say that, oh, I'm not, because I don't do I'm not held back, or I'm not wrapped up in one of the more visibly acknowledgeable consequence-wise when it comes to all the things you just rattled off. And there's much more, by the way.
Yeah. But let's take workaholism. I know plenty of men, some who I've coached, and this goes for many women as well. They work 80 hours a week. They kill it. Let's say they're in investment banking and financial services. They make a killing. They get to 50 and they've lost their wife. They've lost the relationship with their children because they were never at home. They have lost their health. They've had a heart attack because of all the work they did. Their whole identity is organized around their success and their work. It has mood altering effects. It bolsters their self-esteem. It gives them a rush. The deal is a rush, right? And then it has all these negative consequences. Now, the only problem is it's a socially acceptable addiction, right? Things like alcohol, drug addiction, not so socially acceptable. But there are lots of addictions that have the exact same dynamic at work in the human heart and causes the same kind of damage as chemical or behavioral addictions.
Yeah, damage to relationships, especially, even including the relationship you have with yourself in terms of maybe inner monologue or dialogue that you have, as well as obviously outward relationships with family members, friends, coworkers, etc. I feel that's one of for me, I think that's one of the biggest things. And some people, I think they're wondering, why are we talking about addiction on a show about productivity? Well, these are things that impair your judgment, and often being productive is about making the right choice, and this impairs your choices to very detrimental effects.
Yes, for sure. And by the way, if you were talking about the corporate world, in terms of productivity, it is estimated that as the result of addictions, it could be to porn, it could be to whatever the thing is, right? I think it was the National Institute of Health suggested that about 500 million days of work are lost a year due to addictions. 500 million days in lost productivity to addictions. So actually, it has great bearing on things like productivity and on the economy and upon businesses and everything else, but also just on people's well-being, on their happiness, on their health, without which, who can be productive?
Yeah, and you also say that addiction is, it's only a symptom of a larger problem. How so?
Well, so an addiction is what happens when we look to an external solution for an internal problem, right? And that's like going to the hardware store to buy bread, right? You're just shopping in the wrong place, right? And then eventually what happens is the external solution becomes a bigger problem than the internal problem it was trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
And, I think this, again, it's just part of the human condition. It's what, in a way, it's kind of how humans are set up, both, neurologically and, dare I say, at the spiritual level as well. Everyone is looking for a fix for their distress, right? And the fixes we look for outside of the spiritual answers that are available to us cause us eventually more pain than they set out to try and solve.
Well, you mentioned the name of the book, The Fix, and it definitely, as I read that, I was like, oh, like an addict looks for a fix instead of the fix, meaning like the true solution, in other words. I think you may have more, build that out a little bit more. That's just my first initial take. I know I'm kind of somewhere on the right trail there.
Yeah. So 90 years ago, Bill W. wrote the 12 steps. Bill W. was a stockholder and he was on death's door. in a hospital when a friend came to visit him and said, look, I've given up drinking. This guy too was an alcoholic. And he described to him the steps that he went through, right? And they were derived from a Christian organization called the Oxford Group. And Bill W. had a spiritual awakening in that hospital room. And he never drank again from that day forward. Now, remember, this guy was on death's door. He literally was dying from alcoholism in the hospital. He has this crazy spiritual awakening. Next thing you know, a couple of years later, he writes the 12 steps, founds Alcoholics Anonymous. Those 12 steps have gone on to save and transform the lives of millions of people. And the whole premise of my book is, guess what? They're not just for those people. It's for us. It's for the rest of us, right? Like, you too can be free of those ensnaring and tangling patterns of self-destructive behavior that dog your life if you work these steps. And so I'm really happy to be bringing them out of church basements and to have them be out on the street and having people go, oh, these are for me too. And I can have my whole life enriched by them.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the steps involves, and we've all kind of, through movies and TV or direct contact with the 12 steps have become somewhat familiar. And I want to dive into some of them or, all of them really, and give a better, greater understanding, which you do then much more so in your book. But one of the steps involves that power greater than yourselves. And some people, they're not necessarily religious minded in any kind of way, but that doesn't mean this isn't for them either.
That's absolutely right. In fact, the way that Bill Wilson would say it is God as we understood him. So in other words, it's not Buddhist, it's not Christian, it's not Hindu. I mean, it could be if you want it to be. If that's where you want to go, that's great. I know a lot of people in 12-step programs who would say the group is their higher power. I know some who would say nature is their higher power. I was in a meeting last night and a Native American guy was talking about how the wind is his higher power. It just, the key is with the higher powers, it just can't be you because you got yourself here. You know what I'm saying? To quote that old trope wrongly attributed to Einstein, right? The same consciousness that creates the problem can't solve it. So something outside of you has to be able to come in and provide you with a power that will do for you what you've not been able to do for yourself, which is namely change.
And we all need change, but I'm curious, was there anything recently, like in the past? I mean, usually, writing a book takes a while, getting it out there once it's done and it goes through the manuscript and the editing phases and all of that. What was that catalyst that made you think, you know what, I need to take the 12 steps to the mainstream?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. One is, I can't tell you how many times in a meeting I've heard someone say, I wish my mother had a program. I wish so-and-so knew the 12 steps. And because it would make everyone's life so much easier. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who don't identify as addicts or alcoholics, and they've been like, man, I wish I had what you guys had. And I'm like, you can. And here it is. Like, we don't have to hold on to this in church basements. This can go out to a whole bunch of other people. Another catalyst is that, I just see how they've changed my life and benefited me. They've benefited my wife. And I'm like, what would happen if everybody had a plan for transformation? Most people don't. If you said to somebody, what's your plan for change? They're like, they might give you some vague prescription of what they do, but really they don't have a plan. And the steps really are just a plan for personal transformation. And they are evidence and time-based and supported by the science or the anecdotal evidence of millions of lives being changed.
Yeah, 90 years worth of history attesting to the power of these 12 steps.
Yes, absolutely.
So here's the thing. I think, again, I have a vague, up until this point of having the book, I had a vague kind of, because I've never done them or never gone through them thoroughly or, intensely or anything. I had a vague awareness of what the 12 steps were. And by that, I mean, I knew what they were, but I mean, I didn't know what each individual step was. Can we kind of briefly overview, okay, what are all the 12 steps?
Sure. I'm going to do it really fast for the sake of time.
Let's go.
And because this is a productivity podcast, I want to be as efficient as possible. All right, here we go. Number one, we admitted we were powerless over blank, that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, if you're an alcoholic, you'd say alcohol. Or if you're a workaholic, you'd say, my workaholism. Or if you get to fill in the blank. So we admitted we were powerless over blank, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, meaning wholeness or health. Then 3 is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Okay, so basically those first 3 steps are about mending and deepening your relationship with your higher power, as God, as I've chosen to call him, right? And then we go into the next steps. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, right? This is now we're going to start to turn our gaze inward at what's going on inside of our lives. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Now we have mended and deepened our relationship with ourselves. So we've mended, deepened our relationship with God, now with ourselves. And then in 8 and 9, something else is going to happen. In 8, we say, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And then 9 is made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So now we're mending and deepening our relationship with other people. So it's really all about the mending of relationships, God, self, and others. Then in 10 through 12, 10 is continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11 is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12 is having had a spiritual awakening. As the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to fellow sufferers and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So 10 to 12 is really, they're called the maintenance steps. How do I now begin to support growth and health in each of those 3 domains, right? God, self, and others, moving forward, right? And that's it. They're very simple. They're not easy. They're simple. What you realize is that each of those steps has an incredible amount of depth to them. So don't be deceived by the simplicity of them. I really go into it in the book, unpacking the real depth inside of each one and why they're so life-changing.
Wow, that's deep. I think anybody could stop at any single one of those along the way. Some people are going to maybe on the, when you had those different phases as you went through it, they're going to say, ooh, this is the one that's going to be more tough for me. Some people, they'd say, oh, I can get through the first 3, but then that inventory of 4 is going to be their kind of sticking point. They're going to spend a lot of time there. Or some will get further in and they'll say, ooh, the making amends step is going to be the one that's going to take a lot of time for me. But again, that's partly why it's often these are taken up as something you start working through with a regularly meeting group for support, for accountability, for dialogue, etc. What's you've had a lot of experience with this. What are some encouragement moments or stories from that you've had?
Oh my gosh, so many. All the depictions you see of 12-step meetings on television are absolutely false. I've never seen an accurate depiction of one. Like, they're all so glum and miserable, and everyone's just sitting around watching each other not doing something they used to do. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's horrible. You know what? One of the things that newcomers to 12-step meetings often say to me is, I just didn't expect all this laughter. There is so much joy and so much laughter. And of course, there's always tears because there's people sharing heartfelt parts of their lives with each other. But generally speaking, hope, freedom, joy. I mean, it's just, they're a blast. I love going to meetings. And so I also recognize in this book that, for a lot of people, they're not going to immediately gravitate toward going to a group, right? So there's a 120-page workbook that I've really worked hard on to help people walk through each of the steps, like I just spell it out. This is what you do. And it's also set up so you could grab 3, 4, or 5 friends in a book group and say, look, let's just do this for the next 12 weeks. Let's just actually go through these 12 steps and see what they do for our lives. Because here's the thing about addictions or attachments, whatever words you want to use for it. They thrive they feed on shame and secrecy. They feed, and where they grow is in isolation. You need community. There's a great guy who writes a great deal about addiction, and he says the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. That's a very big idea, right? As you noticed, all the steps have to do with relationships, right? Your relationship with God, with yourself, and with others. And because all of us have had traumas and different things in our lives that have come our way, we are a bucket of broken relationships in each of those domains. And to reestablish health, it's best done in a community of support and love and grace and acceptance and kindness and inclusion and all the things we want a community to be. So yes, you can certainly do them by yourself, but as I have said, I do encourage people to try and do them in community.
I am so glad to know that that misconception is false. And I'm hoping everybody hears that there is a lot of joy going on in those groups. Are there any other misconceptions? I'm sure there are, but are there any other misconceptions about the 12 steps that you poke holes in the book?
Yeah. So, well, for example, someone will say, oh, that Ian, he's got a drinking problem. Or, oh, that Bob, he's got a workaholism problem, or so-and-so has a gaming problem, or whatever. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Ian has a drinking solution. Bill has a gaming solution. So-and-so has a porn solution. Those aren't the problems. Those are symptoms of the problem. Those were your solution to the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because that's not the real problem.
Exactly.
Oh, yes.
Right? That's a symptom of the problem. Bob or whoever it is doesn't have a problem with drinking, he has a problem with living. And the drinking is his solution to his problem with living. Right? For his dealing with reality, for dealing with life. And everybody has their little fixes for helping to try and make life more tolerable, right? And less painful and less whatever. And so I'm always telling people, like, when you go to a meeting, people aren't sitting around like looking at each other, not drinking. In fact, people will talk about their experience with a particular substance or behavior in 12-step meetings. But what really happens is we're really focusing on, how do I become a person of kindness, integrity, service, love? How am I becoming a person that is living by spiritual principles? And things like honesty, things like integrity, things like relational wholeness. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we end up talking about. So again, like the purpose of the steps, the stated purpose of the steps, is to actually facilitate a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it expels and renders unnecessary your need for an external solution to an internal problem. Because now you've solved the problem, and whatever it was you were using to deal with that problem before is no longer something that you even care about anymore.
Yeah, we got into, instead of dealing with the symptoms, you've dealt with the problem. So now the outwardly more visible symptom that most people would call the problem isn't necessary anymore.
Exactly. And so that's what people don't understand. It's like, who doesn't need that? That's everybody. And I'm glad that I had a problem that was socially visible and became problematic, because it got me into the process of healing so much quicker. I feel sorry for the poor guys that have addictions and problems and attachments that are more socially acceptable or easier to hide from the public world, that's in secret, because they can go for much longer with all the shame and the pain and the confusion that those addictions cause without anybody even knowing it.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of it. I mean, you're alluding to some of the struggles that you've had. Were there any parts of writing this that were harder for you with your own, Ian's struggles, Ian's solution or past solution, I should say, maybe, struggles wise when writing this?
It's funny. So I had a ball writing this book. This is my 5th book, and I had a blast. I just cannot tell you. I went to Mexico for a year with my wife and just wrote every day and had a ball. I laughed out loud. I cried writing the book. It was a love fest in my writing, right? Then about 6 months ago, the book is very transparent and very vulnerable, and because I tell my own story. And about 6 months ago, I woke up one day and I looked at my wife and I went, oh, wait a minute. Other people are going to read this now. Oh dear. Oh, wow. And this is really vulnerable. But I've gotten over that now. But there was a stage on the journey where I was like, oh boy, did I tell too much? But honestly, I don't really care. I feel like that it was done in service for other people's benefit. And if it helps some people by telling the story, why not? I mean, as a friend of mine likes to say, Ian, your mess is the message in life. Mm. And so talk about your mess. Yeah. And that if it's helpful to other people, then it's well worth it.
Well, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing a little bit of the mess here.
Yeah, sure. So in 1987, I first got sober. I was 20 something years old. I was young. And at that time, deeply confused and, in a place where, drinking had sort of overtaken my life. Right. I grew up in an alcoholic family. I grew up with, alcohol was everywhere. Right. My dad eventually died from alcoholism at the age of 60. So my first rodeo, 1987, right? I was a very young guy. Fast forward now, but what I like to say is I went to some meetings back then at the very strong encouragement of my wife and a therapist, right? But I like to say I just kind of audited the class. You know what I mean? Like I didn't really take it. I didn't take the class for credit.
No skin in the game.
Not enough. And I didn't do that consciously. I just there was a lot of reasons for that. But I did experience a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that I stopped drinking, right? Now, fast forward 2020, I have a relapse. I don't talk about that relapse publicly because it's my business, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just not one of those guys who's going to go on Instagram and say, hey, here I am in treatment. It's like, I'm not like, oh, that just is not my style. And plus that would have lacked humility. It would have been emotionally stupid. I mean, it just wasn't the time for that. I decided, this has been so beneficial to me, working these 12 steps now for credit, that I just want to share it with other people. Right. So I've had 2 rodeos, and this time I pray that I'm on solid ground.
That's great. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. I think there's a lot of other people out there that would, they find that their story is their story and they're a little like closed off, or they don't feel like that's something. In other words, it's not performative. I'm glad that you're saying, there's no benefit to me sharing like about that other than I'm on the other side of it, It helps.
Well, here's the thing, right? Like, this is not a memoir. I've written a memoir before, right? Yeah. This is a book about the 12 steps and the path you can find for healing and for all kinds of good stuff. My story is only in the backdrop of the book so that you can see how they actually work out in a human life, right? So my life is just an example of how it's been changed, right? So again, it's not a memoir. It's not dripping with stories and gory details and stuff like that. The book actually also is kind of funny when you read it. A lot of books about recovery and these sorts of topics tend to be kind of glum and dark. And this book actually should make you smile a lot. I wanted it to be something that took the topic seriously, but also brought some humor to it, right? Because humor is part of healing, right? It should be. Laughter should be part of the healing journey. And so I think it's also an enjoyable reader.
Yeah. You've written memoirs. Obviously, in the middle part, you've got those Enneagram items for sure. I got to bring it up. Like, how do you see the Enneagram and the 12 steps interacting with each other?
Well, they're both really wonderful systems of self-understanding, right? Of gaining self-knowledge. That said, people ask me all the time, well, Ian, are there any Enneagram types that are more prone to addiction than others? And I'm like, nope, there really isn't. All types, addiction is an equal opportunity for everybody. I see all 9 types in the rooms of recovery. I have friends of all types, right, who are recovering workaholics, people pleasers, perfectionists, drug addicts, alcoholics, you name it, of all the different types. There's no such thing, I don't believe, as an addictive personality. People use that phrase all the time. And I'm like, actually, no one's ever proven or even suggested, at least in the clinical space, that there's an addictive personality, right? It's, everybody can get on board with the fun if they choose. That's where I see overlap between personality styles and addiction. But I think also knowing the Enneagram can help you on your journey of recovery from whatever your particular fix is, because each of the Enneagram types does have challenges and strengths that it brings to the table.
Yeah. I can share as a 5 that I know that knowing I'm a 5 when it comes to addiction helps, because an unhealthy 5 is in their head, hoards knowledge and seeks, and so the secrecy and those types of things that definitely are enabling to addiction behaviors and actions is part of it. And then the healthy 5 is counteracting that with its healthy 5-ness. And by doing those things, it helps me to be less secretive, etc. So that's way oversimplification, but again, that's my first initial just take there.
No, it's super well said, right? Like, I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, right? And I know on my recovery journey, because I'm a 4, that when I start to lapse into melancholy and being overly self-interested and all caught up in my feelings, that's a problem for me. And I need to go, I'm not in a good space right now. And I can make other choices at that moment to get myself into a healthier spot. So, I love all these systems. I think they're incredibly helpful.
Yeah. I think even going back to the beginning of this conversation where we're talking about everybody's an addict, and some may wrestle with that. I hope they can kind of get past that and say, oh no, in the list of things you listed off, something in there is definitely maybe not healthy for me, for sure. I think one of the other things that can help people get past that is realizing that the 12 steps and understanding them can help them support family members and friends that need to go through it as well.
Yeah. In fact, I got a call the other day. The book just dropped, and this friend called and said, oh man, I bought a case. And I went, what? I said, that's awesome. And he goes, yeah. He said, I'm giving it out to my family members because they know that I'm in recovery and that the steps have made a huge difference in my life. And they're always like, well, what exactly do you do? And what are you? And he's like, now I can just hand him this book and go, this is what my life is organized around now. And this is the process that I went through. And he said, and in a few instances, I'm hoping that they might themselves realize, oh, I need this too. I think for some people, they're going to buy the book because they're in a program and they have sponsees and they want to work with them. And they're like, okay, well, let's just start with this book. I'm hoping that it'll be used by church or religious congregations of all kinds for deeper conversations around addiction, which is such an enormous cultural problem right now. I mean, seriously, think about it. I got a call the other day from somebody. I'm really worried about my 14-year-old in sports betting. Like, he won't stop. Like, he is caught up in the world of sports betting now. And so, listen, if you're not addicted, you're just one click away these days, right? Like, just one click away.
You just don't know it yet.
You won't know it until it's too late.
Right. Yeah. Well, and also, again, I think that you mentioned that the book has a companion workbook that's going along with it. So talk a little bit about that. Obviously, it's an important resource to have to use along with the book. It's something you can do by yourself. You can do that by yourself, but of course, isolation can kind of be a trap too, or at least not as effective as doing it with others.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, I am generally very suspicious of workbooks. And the reason is that most of the time I hate to put it this way, but a lot of times a workbook is a peripheral product that is sold to generate more income around them. And they don't tend to be very deep, and it's sort of like questions and stuff like that. This is 120 pages, and it is filled with really rich, and I was intimately involved in its creation. And I'm a perfectionist in a lot of ways. And I wanted this thing to be meaty and juicy and really helpful, so that people could actually go through these steps together and get what they need from it. So yes, I'm a big believer that I keep telling my publisher, I'm like, you guys have got to push that workbook as hard as you can. Not because we want to make more money per se, but because what we really want is for people to have a resource to work through the steps as they are painted in the book.
I think that's going to be a great tool. The book itself, as well as the workbook, are going to be great tools to really help people on their journey towards recovery. Sometimes journeys they don't even know that they're on. And so I'm curious, maybe someone's heard this, we've piqued their interest. What's that first step look like? What would you suggest to them?
Yeah, well, one thing would be to have sort of your moment of reckoning, right? Like I think a person has to stop and go, all right, where are the addictions in my life? Where are the unhealthy patterns of addiction in my life? For some people, they may be very serious ones, right? Someone may be, I already know I got a problem with smoking weed. I mean, dude, I can't tell you how many people call me all the time and they say to me, my brother smokes weed every day. Right? That happened to me yesterday. Yeah. Someone called to tell me, my brother is coming to visit and he smokes weed every day. What am I supposed to do with it? You know what I mean? My son is gaming 18 hours a day. Mm-hmm. Or I can't get my kids off their cell phones, or in watching TikTok, scrolling through TikTok 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day. Yeah. Addiction is around us everywhere. We're swimming in them. And people get caught in them and they don't know how to get out once they're in, right? Part of the first step is just acknowledging the problem, like just getting honest, just sitting down and actually getting to the place where you can say, I am powerless over this behavior or this substance, and I don't know how to get out. Like I'm out of ammo. I've actually tried to get out, or I can't imagine being able to get out. That's the starting place. The starting place is admitting I got a problem here, right? Then once you do that, the next step would be you've got to come out of hiding. So find a trusted friend, a therapist, a support group, whoever it might be, a safe person that you can go to and say, I'm struggling here. You have to get past your own fear of rejection or shame and all the different things that you're going to feel, because your addiction actually feasts on secrecy. There's an old mantra in recovery circles. You've heard it. You're only as sick as your secrets. Yeah. You're only as sick as your secrets. So you have to come out of the secrecy and say, yeah, I got a problem. Reading the book, working with a therapist, working with a group, whatever resources are available to you, just get going. The thing about addictions is they're very cunning. And if you see them through the lens of a disease model, they're the only disease that tells you that you don't have a disease. It's called denial, yes. Right? Like it has a built-in denial system. Like, oh no, this isn't a problem. Oh really? My wife just walked out. You know, or, oh, this isn't a problem. I just got fired from my job. But still, it's not a problem. It's their fault, right? It's like the disease itself has a cunning kind of capacity for self-deception that is really hard to quiet unless you're doing this work with some other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the book is out now, and I want to get it in the hands of as many people as possible. Obviously, I'll link up to it in the show notes, as well as past times you've been on the show. If people want to dive deep into Enneagram and how we relate the Enneagram to different, each type to different productivity positives and negatives. But where can people find you, more about you, as well as more about the book?
So the book is titled The Fix: How the 12 Steps Offer Us a surprising path of transformation for the well-adjusted, the down and out, and everybody in between, meaning everybody, I guess. It's available Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, books, independent booksellers, wherever you buy books. My socials are at Ian Morgan Cron, and my website is ianmorgancron.com. Be delighted to have people pick it up and have their life upended in a good way a little bit.
Yes, hopefully so. Hopefully this is going to do a lot of good and be an extra level of resource for people, one, that already know they need it, and especially then I think for those that don't yet know they need it. And
exactly.
Ian, been great talking with you again, and thank you for making this and putting it out there. It's going to do a lot of people a lot of good.
Thank you for having me on and for the chance to talk about it.
That's another podcast crossed off your listening to-do list. Thanks for joining me and listening in on this conversation with Ian Morgan Cron. I hope that you got something out of this conversation about his book, The Fix, and the 12 steps and why they're for everyone. Whether you're there to help support someone else or you're going to use the power of the 12 steps to have some sort of transformation and to use them to stop addictive tendencies in your own life, but to find true solutions that those addictions are symptoms of. Remember, this isn't just for someone struggling with addiction. It's a roadmap for anyone who wants to live life with greater clarity, integrity, and for that matter, joy. If you found this podcast helpful, I would love for you to do me the favor and Ian the favor of sharing it with somebody that you know needs to hear it. Hit that share button in your podcast player app of choice, wherever you're listening to this. Send it on over to them. Let them know you heard this and thought of them. Make sure to check out the show notes for the book, as well as previous conversations I had with Ian on this podcast. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next episode.